Good morning and welcome to another episode of Raise the Bar. It is 7 a.m. on Wednesday, August 9th. I'm your host, Troy Haynes of Sky High and Fly Jump Camps, and we're waiting on Joel Smith to join us from Just Fly Sports. Looks like he's checking into the waiting room right now and starting to turn on everything. So I see him popping up here, and we will get talking about all the kinds of stuff we talk about. Good morning, Joel. Are you on?
I am. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Troy.
Awesome. Hey, it's great to have you on. I appreciate you. You said it's 10 o'clock where you are?
It is, yeah. You're on California time, right?
I'm on California time, yeah. So I'm a little on the early side here for me, but where are you now exactly, Joel? On the East Coast?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was in San Francisco Bay Area for 8 years and moved out to Cincinnati. So just barely on Eastern time here. Not really,
Okay.
like kind of the East Coast, I guess. A little bit more that than California, that's for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate you giving us your time here this morning. And I was just sharing with my listeners the fact that I came across your profile on Instagram, as I do. Anybody that's been listening for a while knows that that's where I do most of my damage. So I'm always finding trainers, athletes, coaches. I'm going across their stuff, and I saw some of your posts, and I saw that you have a rather large following. And all the stuff that you do, I was looking in there, plyometrics, speed, agility, the athletes that you show training, anything from basketball. I saw some track and field. I saw soccer, and then of course all the things that I have my athletes doing at one time or another. So
Hmm.
I know we're kindred spirits. And can you give us a little bit about your background and how you got started doing all this stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So my this is actually like my roots, high jump here. I was
Mm-hmm.
like I played a lot of sports in high school, but ultimately I went to college for track and field. High jump was my best event, and then kind of the other jumps sort of just because I wasn't super fast.
Right, right,
And then start like did hurdles through javelin. Probably should have done a decathlon, honestly.
right. Yeah.
And yeah, from there, decided I was like, all right, well, do I want to do strength and conditioning, sports performance, or do I want to do track and field? And I started as a track coach, just because strength and conditioning was always a critical part of my track training. But when it
Mm-hmm.
came to, hey, the sport isn't track anymore, and it's like soccer or baseball. I mean, it just I don't know. For some reason, it just wasn't as exciting as
Right.
I thought it would be for whatever reason. So yeah, coached track for 6 years in NCAA Division III, all sorts of events, sprints, jumps, hurdles, javelin. I still throwing javelin today at about 40. It's the easiest thing. You don't have to find a high jump mat. You just go throw it.
Right.
So you only needs a
Yeah.
field.
Yeah.
Works well. But then strength and conditioning kind of called me back. I was certified as a strength coach those years doing track and field, but it was actually a Division I school, Cal or UC Berkeley, that
Mm-hmm.
had an opening for a strength coach for track. And originally I was like, well, maybe I'll just do this for 2 years and I can get a better job in track and field. And I ended up there for 8. I
Wow.
actually quit working with track very quickly there and got into aquatics, partially because it was just new and interesting and different. And
Right.
honestly, just being the strength coach for track is not nearly as cool as actually being the coach for track,
Right.
especially if you have a track background. I think if you're just the strength coach, it's that could be perfectly fine, but it's like if you've done track, you're always going to want to coach it. And so
Sure.
in
Yeah.
my time there, was a club track coach as well, though. So I always had the track bug. Started my website, Just Fly Sports, 12 years ago now. So I've
Yeah.
been training a lot of people online through that. I work with some high level track athletes internationally, writing workouts online. Um, yeah, and then right now I'm just in the private sector. I guess I sometimes I don't even know exactly what my job is. I do a lot of things. I
Yeah.
coach in person, online, run a podcast, try to post on Instagram when I can, those kind
Right.
of things. So
Sounds like
that
you and
pretty
I
much
are
sums it up.
similar. Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
similar. I do a lot of those same things. I was looking through your thing. I saw the podcast. I'm like, yeah, I do some podcasts, and then do the personal training both in person and on virtual. which has been an interesting experience. Have one gal training with me from India via
Oh, wow.
FaceTime on Instagram. The Instagram FaceTime, if you ever need to use it, is a lot better than regular FaceTime for whatever reason. If I use just regular FaceTime on a phone, iPad, or whatever, especially as far away as India, which is like 13 hours, right? It was super glitchy, and it would just freeze, and it was terrible. And then had the inspiration where, just because we were staying over through the Instagram feed, and I was like, hey, why don't we try this one up here in the corner, that little Instagram button, and hit that, and clear as a bell. I couldn't believe it. It worked perfectly. So yeah. And then it just sounds like you've been at it, a longer and more established. I've had a super slow climb in that area, but so you have a track background, and then you got your when you say your certifications and all that. I was a kinesiology major at UCLA. What did you do to get started down that road? Was that kind of what your major was? Were you a kinesiology type, or did you just start somewhere else?
Yeah. Well, when I got to college, my original major was, it's almost like embarrassing in the sense that I absolutely had no desire to pursue this, but it was like athletic training, sports medicine, mostly
Hmm.
because I had very little, I just aspirations to really check into things when I was a freshman in college. I just
Right.
knew I was going to do track and I liked it. And found very quickly that sitting around, taping ankles, you know,
Right.
giving people ice was about the last thing I wanted to do. And
Right.
so I switched to exercise science after 2 years of that, and the credits transferred pretty well. And then I got my master's degree in applied sports sciences from Wisconsin Lacrosse, which has a pretty well regarded program. So it was
Awesome.
always, yeah, it was always on that track.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I started kines and ended up getting a master's in exercise science from Cal State Long Beach. So UCLA to Cal State Long Beach. So yeah, similar, real similar path. So, we don't often do this. I often end up, I was just thinking, I've done this pattern. It's so easy to fall into patterns over time, and, start talking, okay, what's your background and what are you doing now? And blah, blah, blah. And you mentioned, I had the same thing, early in the 80s. I had people asking, so what do you do, with that major? What do you do with kinesiology and all that? I forget what was I talking about? I'm thinking about closing my
Oh,
note.
you're talking about your time at Long Beach, so UCLA to Long Beach, and people asking what you do and those
Mm.
kind of things.
You mentioned the thing about ankles. So I remember in the infancy of kinesiology, I was back in my freshman year was 1982 to put a date on everything. So, and I had people asking the same thing, like, "Oh, do you want to be a trainer?" And I was just like, "No, why
Hmm.
don't I don't want to do that?" And I love the trainers. Don't get me wrong. My shins were always bugging me that freshman year still, and I'd go in there for anything. I remember rolling my ankle one time playing basketball, which we weren't supposed to do, and
Same.
hopping on one leg into the training room, and shoving my foot into the ice world pool, and just the different things that, I mean, totally valuable and worthy, but was not me for sure. I was definitely the performance, and I was always from that perspective. When I got to UCLA, everything that I could think of was, how does this apply, to jumping? How does it apply to whatever it is that I'm doing here? Anything, from training, muscle fiber types. I remember taking neuromuscular stuff, which at that time was super theoretical mostly. When we're listening to these classes that are talking about switching innervations to the muscles, and can you change the fibers, and all that stuff. And it was
Hmm.
kind of in its infancy because nobody really had any answers. They were just starting to ask those questions. So sometimes I wish I had a chance to start now, with 40 years more of research and all that stuff behind you. So getting down to it again, you say you listed on your thing track coach. So you still work as a track coach officially training athletes?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say officially right now just because I'm not like signed up as a high school coach or a college coach or anything. I mean,
Right.
it's private coach. So I work
Private
with,
clients.
yeah, it's all private clients right now. Like I work with, it's definitely a blessing to be able to work with some of the people that I can in the private sector, but I do
Uh-huh.
really want to get back in that team atmosphere. I volunteered for a high school my first year in Cincinnati, and it was honestly, it was kind of dystopian a little bit. But I mean, it's par for the course in the sense that it's like, there's these kids and they're like all the kids are running, like the coach doesn't write the workout in terms of like quality or energy systems or any sort of technical emphasis. It's just, I mean, not that I think that that can actually, when you get too technical, I think that can be a problem too. But it was like, all right, we're going to do 2,400 meters of sprinting today. Like, and it was like yardage, and that was like a distance vibe for running. And then by the time I finally got the jumpers, because I just work with jumpers and hurdlers, but I didn't get to work with them until after the running was done. So I got all these kids who were basically destroyed, and I just came in once, maybe twice a week, and I'm just like, this is just not rewarding because
Right.
the whole system was so messed up. But I started to realize that's probably more common in some ways than it is not common. Like there's
Right.
so many high school systems that don't appreciate specificity or how do you train athletes athletically. And so I just kind of been busy with other business things. I wanted to coach this past year, but there was just too much going on with getting a
Yeah.
online course to go. But I really hope to get to be in the high school sector this year. It's just, as well as I, like, you don't get paid to be a high school track coach,
Yeah.
really. And so it's basically
Right.
volunteering. And so, just for me trying to carve out that time to validate it in light of everything else I have going on in my life, it's but I do, it is my goal for the year. I really want to.
So it's like your way of giving back a little bit, right? So, and staying in touch with your roots.
Yeah, it is because online you just miss things. Like I can write the world's greatest program online, which there is no such thing.
Right.
Just because so much of how the result you get is what happens in the actual process of the athlete carrying that workout out. I mean, yes, it does need to be decent. Like you can't just throw up anything on paper and
Right.
say, hey, you're going to high jump, or hey, go run 5 miles and do a bunch of rowing. Yeah, like something that's obviously non-specific. No matter how
Right.
good of a mentality you do, that will not help
Sure.
you. But I would just find being in person, you can really bring in all the spheres of influence. So the bio or the biology, the psycho, the psychological, the social, the team environment
Right.
dynamics, and
Right.
you can really make all those come alive. And not only will athletes do well, but you're giving people just a really great experience that, like Tony Holler says, is the best part of their day. And so
Yeah.
there is also that too, where it's like my intuition, like I learn every coaching session, I learn a tremendous amount. It's just like what your intuition tells you as athletes are going through the different events and going through their technical rehearsals and everything there.
Right.
So yeah, I really want to get back to it just for that sake, because
Yeah.
even just one-on-ones, I feel like doesn't give you the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
so hoping to
Yeah.
get back to it.
It's funny that you bring that up because I'm just spent this this summer in particular working at one of my good friends is Matt Smalling is the one of the jump coaches at a local high school here in the LA area, Redondo Union, which is a beautiful campus, by the way. If you've ever been to a high school that looks like a college,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
one that it's just unbelievable sports mecca. When you walk down, I don't even know where the campus is. I know where the track is, and the track, and football stadium, and then soccer fields, and then a pool, and then a 2-level gym. I mean, this place is gorgeous. And so spent a couple hours, 4 days a week with the kids doing, just track camp, and was able to recruit some tall, skinny kids to come over and high jump, and it was a lot of fun, like you said. And it was, you get a chance to wear a lot of hats, like you said. It's like, we didn't really get into the weight room much. These are incoming freshmen for the most part. There's a few that weren't, but it was just all beginning, teaching them how to run, teaching them, the A skip, the B skip, and then, a little bit of running around. And then, Matt would let me take the high jumpers over and start giving them the basics, so it is a lot of fun. And you're talking about the dynamics. That's why I got started on this, was the, from the single, which I do a lot of, and the team. If for my private clients, lots of times it's singles, but then sometimes they overlap, and I'll say, hey, do you mind if there's a couple other people in the session? And it really makes more sense when you're busy to combine when you can. And I just like what you're saying, that dynamic of 2 or 3, or
yeah,
maybe 5. Five's not a bad unwieldy number. It it can slow down a little bit for the ones. And, it depends. Some people really do thrive with the single. But I do like that dynamic because number one, I'm too old to demonstrate a lot of stuff anymore. And if I do, I put the bar very low. If you've seen any of the posts,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I demonstrate, the bar's at 4 feet or something, nothing like college. And I'm usually trying to demonstrate a very simple principle, which I can demonstrate at that height. But, with them, they need someone to push them. And, that there's just that little bit of competition, which can raise, the level a little. And then it's so easy to just go, hey, okay, everybody come watch this. And I shoot the video. I'm like, okay, watch this guy's knee drive. He's really doing a good job. That knee's coming up and across, that hip, it's giving him good rotation, blah, blah, blah. And then, so it had a free demonstration in it that I didn't have to do. And it has, they all get a chance to see it so they can, everybody gets a chance to piggyback off of each other. And they all generally have inherent strengths and weaknesses that, you at least have a chance to hit, a wider range of things. So yeah, I get what you're saying. So getting even on the other track, Joel, you mentioned something that's, big, and a lot of athletes that are listening and coaches. How do you, and this is going to sound crazy because I've just now finished my level 1 USA track and field, certification. And they flew by this, and it was in their book. I got exposed to people writing programs for me when I was at UCLA. One of the first times, after a couple of years in the weight room of basically just winging it, I think I went in and asked one of the guys to, Bob Alejo, if you're out there listening. Bob was one of the assistants that mostly did football, but wrote one of my first programs my senior year, 5 sets of 8 back squats, and, gave me the little chart, and it had however many days a week. And, I was like, wow, cool. And how do you learn that? How do you get started on that? And what are some parameters? Because I mean, I've been doing it for a long time without actually sitting down and writing everything out. When I have my kids in high school, it's like, okay, hey, today we're going to lift. We're going to do our plyos with that. Tomorrow's gonna be a run day. And, but a lot of it was, you kind of get into a schedule, but it wasn't really scheduled. You know what I mean? It was like, it was kind of almost dictated to me. So how do you approach that from a, practical standpoint?
I think the big thing, Troy, is, people will talk about the perfect training split, ad infinitum. And like I said, the perfect program, I don't think there is one. But I think that there's two main principles, because I have people who will, I've given like periodization talks before and training arrangement. And it's like, for some reason, my brain just wants to go philosophical more than nuts and bolts, which probably drives people absolutely bonkers, because most people just want to say, hey, what's a training split? All right, I'll tell you one. All right, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, jumper sprint. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, do tempo, med balls, and recovery. Boom, there you go. Like, done. And you could lift 2 of those jump sprint days. There you go.
Right.
That's easy. Like that. And you could I could put it in Chat GPT. I could put that in Chat GPT now and say, make me 10 iterations of this, and it could give you 10 iterations, and they'd probably all be great. Which is so funny, because just what I said is like the easiest thing in the world, but like back to that kind of like dystopian track practice, there's just, the question is, do you want to listen? Do you care enough to not do the thing you were doing in the 70s or 80s or whatever? Do you care about being better? So, there's that. But so I wanted to make sure I threw down a nuts and bolts piece before I got philosophical. So the philosophical thing is more so, I just think the key piece with that is just, it needs to be something that's repeatable, that you have a weekly structure that fundamentally either A, doesn't change, or B, if it does change, it's part of a plan. So like, for me, I can give you an example. When I was at Wilmington College, usually the structure was, we'd start the year in the general training period. The off season would be, we'd sprint Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the most part, and we do easy stuff like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And of course, not many people, Saturday is optional, not many people would show up. But then we would flip-flop once we got to you would call it SPP, or special prep preseason. We're getting ready to be intense. Then I would switch it to what I would consider or call a potentiation driven model, which where instead of going hard every other day, where you do your, and hard is intense. So that's jumps, that's fast sprints, that's lifting weights and
Right.
plyos and all that stuff. So I started to, I would switch that when we got to special into a day, a split that was Monday and Thursday was lifting and tempo, which is like crazy. That's like a mind blower because I don't think too many people do that. So it's like you
Sure.
lift weights and you do like 5 200s.
Yeah.
In reality, it's funny because you wouldn't see that in a lot of workouts, but it worked just freaking amazingly, largely because in my belief, you lift and then especially if you lift in the morning and you run those 5 200s later, or you lift first and then run, you kind of
Hmm.
wash out all the negative stuff that happens in lifting, because lifting is
Okay.
mostly bilateral, like 5 sets 8 squats. That's an extremely bilateral stimulus. In fact, the main what do you call it, driver of a squat is, I'll try to say this simply, but it's basically the two knees squeezing, creating a squeezing force inwards together towards the middle.
Right.
Now you don't want to do that too much when you come out of the bottom because it just looks terrible and you could put too much stress on the knees, but that's the force that gets you out of the bottom.
Right.
Whereas high jumping, you really have more of a little externally rotated knee, like a bow leg. More of the pressure's on the outside edge of the foot because you got to bounce off the ground. So
Yes.
you do a lot of two leg squatting and you don't excuse me, counterbalance it. You
Right.
end up with more ground contact time in the jump. So you start to add these second and third order effects creep in, and they're negative. So that was so we, yeah, just again, long story short, is we do like lifting and tempo, and then we'd actually jump the next day and do some sprints, short sprints to warm up for the jumping. And then Wednesday was like a game day recovery, and Saturday, I don't know if people want to show up and do a little tempo sprint, they could. But
Right.
it's funny because you would think, oh man, if you lifted on Monday and did tempo, wouldn't you be racked for Tuesday? And initially, you're not going to be your best, but
Right.
once you get used to it, you would be surprised. And I think
Yeah.
that was the thing. I was always so I was always I mean, my early experiences in jump training were like, do your plows, do your depth jumps, wait a long time, be totally fresh when you jump. But then you can start to get in this loop where you get too conscious about, am I fully recovered? I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
I think there is a time for that, but and it's easy to overtrain. But it's just, long story short, that's what I did for college age athletes. I would probably do a very watered down version of that for high school individuals.
Yeah.
We might not do, maybe be lifting and then run like 5 100s to wash it out or something. It
Yeah.
would be less. It would be a lot less and more minimal. So but I just think that whatever the structure is, it just should be something that is reasonable, but then athletes can almost learn to adapt to it. So just so I mentioned, like, that was my structure, and the athletes learn to adapt to it.
Yeah.
I think you could have something similar as long as it's in the ballpark, as long as it's not just, you're not like blasting people with too much tempo sprints and
Right.
or doing just obnoxious lifting, which in my opinion, I would actually say 5 sets 8 for a high jumper is bordering. If it's full back squats, that's starting to get a little on the extreme end, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um, as long as it's not obnoxious stuff, the athlete can learn to manage the week. And it's almost like in their mind, they might be like, okay, I know I got this tomorrow. Here's how I'm going to go approach today. And
Right.
that's like I think where we are in a society that it's just funny. Like you mentioned, you're on Instagram a lot. And I'll tell you, if you want to be popular on Instagram, you say the magic words. The magic words are the best, science. It's just
Yeah.
because people's view of science is not, I think, the true scientific method. It's more like if people hear science, they think it's 100% the best
Right.
ever, you know.
Right.
Um, and without looking at all the art that goes into it, that actually makes the science come to life. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm kind of like losing track a little bit, but I just think that the skill of managing the workload, as long as it's reasonable, is also a big part of it.
Yes.
So in that sense, I don't think there's a magic formula.
Yeah.
And I think that, even some of the workouts I write, like I have a very elite pole vaulter. I write all his workouts except for his vault days. And I know that he manages some of the work I write for him in a way that it's not 100% on the script. And honestly,
Right.
that's good. Like, I'm like, that's awesome, because
Yeah.
otherwise it would be boring and stale and you wouldn't be
Right.
managing it like you need to as an athlete. So those are just a few thoughts there. I hope I didn't go on too
I
long.
like that a lot because the one thing that I'm finding with even my high school kids, is it's really great to give them ownership of what it is that they're doing. You know what I mean? Where
Yes.
they
Yeah, 100%.
can, I'm trying to teach them in a way both to be an athlete and also eventually someday a coach, where I say, hey, you, I can tell you these pieces, like we do, say glute bridges one day and say, and you can see how this is going to help you elevate your hips right when you're raising over the bar. It's part of our layout package, right? We got a bunch of drills that we do in the pits. And then, these exercises are obviously, anything posterior chain where you're, pushing your ankles up, your glutes, you're pulling your head back towards the base of your spine, anything that's going to crunch you into that reverse position. Yes, we want to strengthen all those muscles. And then, like you said, there's, after I've shown them enough of those, maybe the program would just say glute work,
Yeah.
real basic, and say, we've done all these, and you can pick and choose between these, because you and I both know some exercises you like and some you don't. And then at the same time, there's times I'll tell them, you may not like this one, but it's really, really good for you. Just the same way maybe you don't like brushing your teeth before you go to bed, but it's probably a good idea, even if you don't like doing it, and you probably should mix those in every once in a while. And if you just do your favorites, it's kind of like that. So you got to teach them the variety, teach them the things. I do a 0-step drill that, to a man, I think all my athletes hate. And I'm like, and I go, I don't even know where I came up with it, because my coach, we would usually go, my little coach, those of you that have listened before, is Baru Elias. He was at Long Beach City. He had this heavy Romanian accent, had about a year learning curve of me being able to understand what he was saying. And then, but we always did backovers, and then we would do 1 steps, then 3 steps, then 5 steps, and we would work our way back. And, I do that to this day. It was grilled into me. And as I've learned how to coach more and more, I understand the simplicity of it and the wisdom of it. And, at the same time, like you said, it's not a formula. I've found it to work. Well, one day I'm like, well, why don't I just put their foot on the ground already, so they don't really get any speed, and all we can do is go position and work takeoff mechanics. And I'm telling you, it's like, it is the most awkward drill that you can do in the high jump, to just be standing there and then ask them to jump. And then every once in a while, of course, somebody comes in and kills that drill, where you're just like, wow. Like, usually everybody struggles picking that one up. I had one kid do that one day. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy jumped like 5'3" with no speed at all, just standing there. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great, And then his dad let him play passing league in June, and he got hurt, so that went away. But so when the other question I had for you, Joel, and this is obviously me wanting to know how you do it. And you mentioned something that I thought was fabulously on with the lifting, and then doing something explosive, either speed agility, like you said, a sprint, maybe some, I call it CNS work, right? Central nervous system, really fast, and kind of washing out I'm assuming the lactic acid, and getting some of the range of motion back, and getting rid of some of the stiffness, right? You're using it right away. I just noticed a gal on Instagram. She's a 16-year-old from Poland who has almost jumped 6 feet. She jumped 1.82 m, very tall, very thin. And you mentioned the bilateral aspect, which, for those of you that are listening, is doing 2-legged squats as opposed to a 1-legged squat, let's say. I've been seeing a lot of single leg support coming out now, a lot of step ups, a lot of lunges, a lot of jump lunges, jumping switches off one leg to the other. Not as I've seen some one-legged deadlifting. I've seen some one-legged hang cleans. Obviously, you can't lift as much weight with the one leg, but it's more specific, right? And then I saw this girl, Maya Slodzinska, who was doing it looked like she was in her meet attire, and it was at a meet. There was a little corner somewhere that they had weights, and she was lifting. And my assumption is either A, she was done competing and lifting after, or B, which I think is a little bit more likely since it was explosive and quick and she wasn't doing big sets, she was lifting before the competition.
Mhm.
So I was going to ask your thoughts on that process, if you've ever, incorporated that into it, or you can see a purpose behind it or whatever.
Yeah, that's another one that's a little bit tricky. So the general answer before I get philosophical is yes. I'll just leave it at that. But then the art of it is going to be very different, not only on might it work, but the repeatability and the appropriateness to always do it. So I'll give you examples from I'll actually start with the swim world, because this is where I just found it really interesting. I worked for 7 years at Cal in the swim program, and what they found is when they had dual meets, as opposed to like the big conference meet, dual meets, like, it's like a dual track meet. It's not a big deal. They would oftentimes lift and then go out and do the dual meet. And a part of it was Cal was so good, they knew they were going to win, so they didn't really care either.
Right.
And it also kind of kept the mentality of, oh, we're training through it and doesn't matter. I was really, I don't know, the I feel like when I coach high school track, I don't know if I like training through it as a term, but that's maybe that's just kind of a different story. But
Right.
anyways, well, and I say that partly because so the long story short is people would lift, kids would lift. They do like heavy cleans or something. Not everybody, but some of the key players, the good athletes or
Yeah.
the higher level athletes, they go to heavy cleans and they'd go swim lights out, and they felt good. They felt charged up. It's like,
Right.
oh yeah, I felt charged up. But then and that was repeatable enough that the coach decided to do that at the national meet, like the big stage where you're all tapered down and whatever.
Right.
And so they did, and it was kind of I did a big survey of like the athletes who decided to do it, who didn't, and it was basically like the bottom line was it was kind of negligible. Probably didn't really do anything. At the end of the day, might have even been a little bit of a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, well, why does it work when we're just thinking about training and we don't care? But when you care a lot and you're starting to taper, it's so I just think that I guess my thought is that of there are athletes that are more potentiation friendly for sure, like Ben Johnson in track. Like apparently he squatted 600 pounds or something before he ran his 979.
I
Or
could believe that.
you have I've heard of like Javier Sotomayor, who when he first time he cleared 8 feet, did a like bunch of heavy snatch triples in the morning, and then goes and jumps 8 feet later.
Right.
Um, and I think there's the thing with that, so it definitely exists. Even in the throws at Wilmington College, we would lift heavy in the morning, and then they'd go compete later and do well, and felt it was really helpful. And so I guess, the main thing with that, Troy, is I just think that is, I would just call it high juice. Like that's a thing that's special. And I think the thing is when you take that thing that's special and you just make it very mainstream, like we're going to do this every single time,
Right.
you lose you kind of lose the surprise of it. Because I believe, from my understanding, like I think that Sotomayor, I don't know if that was like, oh, I'm doing 8 to 3 heavy snatches because this is what we do. Maybe you just did it. It's like, yeah, it's a low key meet, and then you surprise yourself. Like
Right.
that happens
Right.
all the time.
Sure.
And there's like this expectation piece with it. And so I think that sometimes when we try to make things too down to a science with that, like, all right, heavy lifting, it almost becomes overcoached, if that makes sense. Like the
Yeah.
feeling, I guess, is you're trying too hard. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
you're trying a little bit too hard here, whereas the best things are always very simple. And so for me, if I was going to use, and I'll say last anecdote is my high jump personal best was 7 feet, but probably the best meet I ever had, where I jumped, I should have made 7. I was over it by the farthest I was over. It was indoors, and I blew away my triple jump PR and just had a really good meet. And the 3 days before that meet, I had set a 2/3 squat double or triple PR, like
Mm-hmm.
very strong. and then rest 3 days and then go blow away my high jump and triple jump PRs. But the thing is, if I would have kept hanging on that sequence, like, oh, I got to keep doing this, I got to keep
Right.
doing this, it loses its magic. And then it's like you get attached to that thing that happened in your past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's that's where I started with something that was more like a try to say nuts and bolts, because I get philosophical really quick. But that's
Right.
just because I think that so often we don't, and
Formula
everyone
driven,
has
yeah.
different ways of thinking about these things, but I'm always like, I just think it's so easy to get attached to a sequence, and you live and die by that. Where I think if you're going to do that, I think you just find the athletes who are good at potentiation, and you just kind of save that sequence. It's like, all right,
Mhm.
we're not going to do this early in the year. We're going to do this 3 times in the whole year, and it's
Yeah.
going to be at this meet, and this meet,
Right.
and then you make it special. And
Yeah.
so I've seen good results too, where people do like a max even clean 7 days or 10 days before the big meet or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think once you bring it to the meet, I think that could possibly be distracting. This is
Yeah.
my own opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. What you're bringing up is such an interesting thing, Joel, because I find, number one, like you're talking about, where everything in our society is like packaged, right? So
Yeah.
I've got this. I mean, you're talking about, you and I both have this on our sites, from I have these kinds of different packages of things that I offer. And then, your expertise you're bringing to the table, this training experience, former athlete, you've got all these things. And so everybody wants it to be all nice and set up for you. And you and I both know there's just so much variability in the different types of athletes, the different types of sports,
Yeah.
their background, what are they bringing to the table? Did they do a lot of lifting as they were coming up? Or are they just, more natural in their training? Were they poorly trained, before they got to you, or overtrained, or, and like you said, maybe some people thrive on an every other day thing for a while. And when you switch it to the Monday, Thursday, and you start doing, say run, lift, and recovery, run, lift, recovery, or throw a jump day in there or whatever. So you go from, instead of 3, that every other day cycle, you go every other day. And then maybe they don't do as well, and you're like, okay, wait, what's going on here? And it's just like, there's so many variables. That's why you tell somebody, like, you don't even, and like you said, the art of it is, maybe one athlete thrives on the program that you've written, and maybe somebody else, it's just not quite the same for them for whatever reason, and you're just like, that's the beauty of it. And the struggle behind it is like, how do I get it there? Yeah, it's very easy, I think, to sit back and just go, well, hey, this is my system. I built this, this works. It's got to be either on you or whatever. And that's just the easy way, because if you're really driven by performance and trying to get the best out of the athlete, maybe that little cookie cutter thing doesn't work, for that one particular. I had this happen with me with a high jumper I recruited for 2 years. I met him at a summer camp at UCLA, 6'2", 160, fast, flexible, cocky. Love this kid.
Mm-hmm.
He comes out and he jumped 6'3" as a freshman, and he's at this camp. And right away, we're doing drills and everything. I'm like, oh my God, this kid, he looks really great. And I start recruiting him. And he just had no interest in me. I'm a former alum. I'm telling him I jumped, 7'3" when I was there. And I've got my system and everything. And this is like my first or second year in business. I really didn't have much going yet. And he just couldn't be bothered, and he was working with his coach, and then he just fell apart. He and his coach did not get along, and he just, and was then gun shy because of it for a couple of years, And so I finally get him. He's a senior year. He had just missed going to state for like 2 years in a row at the Masters meet out here. Didn't quite put it together and couldn't make the last step. And I'm like, hey, come on, man, let's do it. And he finally buys in. And I tell you what, he was a struggle from day one, because my contention with him was that he was just too close to the bar. And in my mind, that was like the simplest thing in the world. I'm like, we're just going to move your approach back. We're going to give you a little bit of room, and you'll be that much more effective, because he was fast and light, but he would always be in the middle of his takeoff too close. and he'd have to shut his knee drive back and start to lay out too early, and it would, cause him to not finish his rotation. There's a million technical things that would came to my head, but I'm like, this is gonna be so easy, Jack. We'll just move you out. And no, moving Jack out was not easy. It was
Yeah.
a battle. It was like we put a piece of tape on the ground. He would go right past the tape, right back to where he was used to jumping from, too close. He would always get height way behind the bar, knock it off with his heels. And I'd be like, okay. So we put a piece of foam rubber on the ground. He would either step on it, step over it, and do the same thing. I'm like, okay, why don't we put a bar on the ground? And I said, if you step on that bar, you're going to roll your ankle, and I put it at really close to start, like right at the base of the standards where nobody could step on it. And then I call it the roll the bar out drill. So we would just roll it, farther out. So it stayed on the same line and it kept getting farther out. And I had him doing run throughs and scissor kicks. And just, it was like amazing. That one workout, when it finally clicked, you could see it because he got to where the bar was like 3 or 4 feet away. I go, we're shooting for like Barshim, like way the heck out.
Yeah.
And so we kept rolling it back, and he was doing full run throughs, scissor kicks from like 5 feet out, over 5 feet, which haven't had anybody do since. Jack was immensely talented, and he starts doing it, and finally it started to click. But this is over months. I mean, this whole process took almost the whole summer and part of the fall before we found something that clicked. And I remember thinking, like, God, why can't he just, move back? But it was like, if my formula said, okay, here's what you do, and here's the temptation now, I get another athlete who's having the same struggle. And I'm like, oh, here's your magic fix. It's the roll out the bar drill. Not always. It doesn't always work, So yeah, I find that interesting. Like you're saying, there's no magic formula. There are things that work, but who knows? Like, who knows what the variables were, where they were in their training. I find it interesting. You said it in the beginning where it's like, oh yeah, we're quote unquote working through the meet. So we obviously were heavily training, right? So you're like, yeah, we'll lift, who cares, and we go through it. But like you said, when the chips get down, even the most casual athlete might be thinking, okay, wait, shouldn't I just, rest up and be peaked for this meet and not do anything, taxing right before I go? And maybe you get somebody who buys in, you get somebody who doesn't, and it can affect the psychological aspect is huge, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially in high jump compared to, I'm sure, pole vault too. I only coach pole vault a little bit, and I shouldn't coach as a loose term, but
Right.
yeah, the mental program that you see happen when an athlete gets within 5 steps of the bar and their strategy. I mean, it's kind of it's interesting. It's like, because you're not just seeing skeletal frame and muscle fibers, you're seeing the mind. There's a lot of fear, or like you mentioned, that other athlete was very caught in the tradition of whatever his coach was doing, and it's also represents a break from tradition. It's just in embodied form. So I've had good luck with that constraint as well, like putting something that they can't step on or whatever. So it's definitely a helpful one.
It's so interesting, the mental part of what you're talking about. I've been finding this out recently. I keep telling the kids, I go, I want to write a book, because there's such a difference in getting them early. First of all, I keep thinking, why are the Europeans, killing us with this high jump? I keep finding these 14-year-old kids, these girls from Latvia that are jumping 5'9" and 5'10", and you're looking at them, they go, yeah, I'm 13, I'm 14. I'm like, going, 13? You're 13 or 14 and you're jumping 5'8" or 5'9", over here, that almost wins state, their senior year. And you're like, and over there, it's just common, and I'm like, so what are they doing over there? And I'm trying to peek behind the curtain and see the lifting and the bounding and everything. It's like, it's nothing ground shaking, I don't think, but I'm like, what is the difference? And is it because they're getting them early? Do they play soccer first and they get there? I don't know. Like with the Russians, are they all taking ballet when they were younger? You always hear these things.
Yeah, I think all those places, it isn't. Yeah, the training isn't magic. It's kind of like enough little things in the development that add up to a big thing, and it's a bigger deal. Like here it's like play soccer, play basketball, like no one cares. I mean, I shouldn't say that, that's depressing, because actually it's funny, you look up the greatest participation of all sports and track is actually one of the highest.
Hmm.
But then you think, well, how many of these people who are doing this because it's social, it's just something fun to do.
Right.
Whereas you would think like whoever's jumping 5'8", 5'9" over there, like there's people who really care, and
Sure.
I do think the developmental technical piece tends to more likely to not be much better. I mean, you and I are high jump nerds,
Right.
but I mean, there's probably a higher concentration of coaches like that over there where they're just getting better. I mean, it is interesting with high jump. I mean, I've heard it said like high jump is like, oh, it's such a difficult event to coach relative to long or triple. And in a sense it is, but honestly, if you just have a feel for it, it's really not any harder in my opinion. But I just think here it is because I think maybe it's a little bit like understanding the 3D nature of it. You actually have to have
Yes.
maybe another lens that goes beyond the typical 2D coaching lens. You have to
Yeah.
understand like even the way that you feel when you take off involves like 3D stretches of particular muscles. It's not all
Yeah.
happening in the straight line. So I just think it's also kind of a mentality here. I just think, yeah, it's probably a combination of a lot of things, but if we cared about track the same way we care about basketball or soccer
Sure.
or football or whatever, and it went beyond just the participation numbers, I do think you would see, like if you had, instead of kids like playing pickup basketball, they were pickup who can jump over the highest stick,
Right.
like Stephen Holm, and when he
Right.
was like 6. Yeah, you'd probably see a lot more of those people,
Sure.
but it's so cultural, I think, is a big piece of it.
Well, you bring up a super interesting point with that, because this has come out time and again on this podcast where we're saying, lamenting the fact that track and field is really a lower level sport here, simply because, and this sounds way too simplistic, but I know that the truth hits home. If you can't see it on TV easily and it's not bringing in any revenue, then it's not that important over here, like you said. So, and Tony Holler mentioned it. You threw out Tony's name earlier, and I had Tony on the podcast, and he was like, the feed the cats, and all that. But we're like the red-haired stepchild, of all the sports, because generally it's somebody's second or third sport. They're just slumming in the spring because they're out of season and they're looking for something to do. And so, I recruit obviously from the girls soccer team. The girls soccer team finishes in February or March, depending on how long their playoff run is. And then all of a sudden there's all these soccer girls that really don't want to keep playing right then and go right back into club. And they come out and they slum in track, and they're already in shape and they're great. They can do everything. You can have them run anything from the 800, to all the sprints. They can hurdle, they can jump. And you're just like, gosh, these guys are great, And then basketball, guys basketball finishes right about the same time. Sometimes it even runs into the season a little bit, depending on how good their playoff run was, and they come over, and basketball players are perfectly trained for high jumpers. They run nothing but short sprints. They do their own plyos. They're running up and down, jumping off one leg, like,
oh yeah. Basketball is the ultimate plyometric in my opinion. I mean, it just from a general perspective,
absolutely.
It's amazing.
They're pre-trained before they get to you. It's the only thing I always tell them I wish I could do. And the risk is, of course, rolling an ankle in a game. But it's like everything they do, I try to recreate what they've already been doing in their training, because it's almost foolish to do something different. It's like you need to run lines. I'd almost go on the court and just go, hey, sprint to the first line, sprint back, sprint to the middle line, sprint back, all the way down there, sprint back. And, whatever we were doing before, let's keep it up. I had a high school teammate who jumped 6'10" like 3 or 4 times the first 3 to 5 weeks of the season. I mean, he came out of basketball in fantastic shape, came right out and started jumping really high. He jumped at the end of the season the year before, he jumped 6'8" and technically made 6'10", and one of the standards slipped down. So they didn't give him the jump. And, we knew he jumped 6'10". So I'm like, he comes out the next year, boom, 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 6'10", like it's nothing. And I'm like, man, Dave's just killing it. At the end of the year, he tapered down really slow.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And he didn't jump. He only jumped 6'2" at our league finals and didn't even go to CIF, which was a major upset. And, most people are, what the hell ever happened to this guy? It's just like, my thought after years later was he didn't train the same way. We'd come out to track, and the high jumpers were notoriously lazy, first of all. And our coach was the shot put guy. So the shot and disc guys didn't run. And we didn't run that much. We jumped, and usually my shins would kill me because we jumped almost every day, and we did some lifting, but mostly we over plyoed, I would say. And and then since we weren't training the exact same way that he was, when he came in, then he started to lose that effect.
Yeah,
So,
that's a big deal. That's something I think about a lot. And I'm right with you, recreating basketball, just because, again, I think a lot of it goes to perception too, because when you play, you aren't thinking about, all right, now we're going to do 50 times 15-meter sprints today, but basketball is that, but with an insane amount of variability, twists and turns. And, it's meaningful. Like when you chase somebody or go to the ball, like your body works in such a better, more pure timing than if a coach told you and said, oh yeah, and do these two things. It's just not even close. So it's almost like this purity as well as timing in it. And for high jump too, it keeps you lean, like power to weight, ankle, foot strength, and all that stuff. It's really key. Yeah. So even what you were saying, I think honestly, the perfect world, if the USA was a track centric nation, which was never going to happen.
Right.
Honestly, I would say it would actually have track be your second sport in high school, and do basketball as a main sport. But when it's track season, you're not going and doing AAU or any of that, and you're taking a month off, or you are doing nothing, which never happens, unfortunately. Or if you're a female, maybe you're doing soccer and then track. But it's like when you're in that season, you don't think about anything. It's in some ways, I think about track, it's almost it is funny. I'm sure you're in California, right? So UCLA, the Pac-12 hates UCLA because they went to the Big Ten, and then with USC and started that chain of events. But it sounded like that was a long time coming, even with the commissioners of the Pac-12. I don't want to get into that, but it's like we're starting to see this meltdown of even college sports with the NIL, and it's like, at what point are we just going to say this is pro? And at what point every bubble's got to pop? You know what I'm saying? Like at some point every bubble pops, and I'm not just saying this because track's like my favorite sport. Because if track was like this, it would be ridiculous. Like if kids were doing track all year and they didn't do anything else, I'd be like, well, this is stupid. Like, why are we doing this? And so it's almost like right now I feel like in some ways track represents like doing something just for the sake of it, for the sake of working at a skill and just trying to get better at that skill repeatedly. Whereas I think it's very possible in sports like basketball right now just to get on an AAU team that doesn't even teach you skills. You're just there to be there, and hopefully you get playing time, and hopefully someone sees you or whatever. But it's like, to me, the process of learning a skill in track, more singular skill or a set of skills across a period of time, I just think offers such good benefits of moving for the sake of moving and the pure love of improving at a singular skill. And so for that, I don't know. I kind of wonder if everything blows up, and I don't know. I'm not optimistic the track would become necessarily bigger or better, but it might. Maybe people will start enjoying it for what it is. And it's in the similar way that I think Tony runs his high school program, where it's like if you talk about biopsychosocial, he has that social part nailed, and people love it. So hope we'll see what happens.
He's got the buy-in, like you said, from the philosophical part, and I've been stealing liberally. And he's going to be out here. He said in February when we did our podcast, I'm going to be one of the people in the front row, because I want to ask the same questions I'm asking you. So I'm like, okay, if you only run your athletes, they never go over 200 meters. I'm like, for me, that's not a problem for my jumpers, because I don't think I've run them a couple times at 150s early in the season. And it's like long and triple, that makes more sense to me. But in the high jump, I'm like, you're only running 45, 60, 70 feet to the bar, on a tight curve. I'm like, from a sports specificity standpoint, even you guys running 100 meters doesn't make sense to me, because I need you fast at a certain point, but I don't need you to be fast for 100 meters. I need you to be fast for 3 or 4 steps and actually accelerating through there. Right. So how do I get that out of you? And my mind keeps going to us doing the basketball lines. It's not that far. It's fast, so you're getting up to speed. And then, so I'm like, hey, Tony, how does this work? How do you train, your 800-meter guys, if they're not going to do those traditional breakdowns that you're talking about, 4, 5, and 600s with, limited amounts of rest or whatever, the workouts that everybody hates, like he said, that he had to learn how to train them out of, how do you get them to run just 200? And the whole idea that speed builds endurance, but endurance doesn't build speed. I love that. Feeds right into what I do. Right. So, what we're going on. I was thinking what you were saying, and this makes the most sense to me, is that track really should be, and by some is, where you develop your skills. Like you said, I think it's beneficial. This is the famous Lost podcast, a former UCLA athlete that I bumped into, who was actually the son of a guy that I was on the track team with at Millikan High School back here in the 80s. He played football at UCLA, and he knew Maurice Jones-Drew. So I got him to hook us up, and I got Maurice Jones-Drew last summer about this time, early in the morning at 7:00, and I forgot to hit the record button. And so we had this great hour-and-a-half long talk, and he had done track and field and ran, the 100 meters in state against Reggie Bush, right?
Oh, nice.
We talked about all the benefits of track and field, and he was, just lamented the fact that, we don't have the same kind of participation that they used to, but there's still some, and some of the best football players in league history were former track athletes. Herschel Walker ran track, Bo Jackson ran track and field. Roger Craig for the 49ers was a hurdler at Nebraska, right? You have all these great stories of people that they did do those things. And you think, what is the benefit? And you're like you said, well, you're learning how to run better. You're learning how to do these things better. And how could that not help you in your own real sport, right? So maybe we need to push that aspect to grow, track and field.
I think, it's part of it too, though, is even within that, it's, I talk about this on my podcast, is the more skills you learn, the better just general intuition you get on how to learn new skills.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, I don't know, I kind of feel sometimes like track is not presented that way. This is a totally different discussion. I'm actually running out of time a little bit here on my end, but it's
no worries.
We present track sometimes as hit these magic positions, lift your knee here, point your toe here, put your arm here.
Right.
But then if you get people who do that, I mean, again, there's a bandwidth of positions elite athletes get into, but in the actual learning and teaching process, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
And there's that that feeling, constraint based, like you lay out the art of laying out the proper constraints to help athletes solve the problem, and then them noticing how things changed. I think for me, people would probably refer to me as a creative strength coach, but like any skill that I coach, or even when I do play sports, I play basketball or frisbee, there's so much of that, what I've learned from track that shows up in those sports. But even more than that, it's what I really learned in my last 10 years of coaching track, which is the feel, the intuition, kind of like the inner game of tennis, if you're familiar with that type of stuff.
Yes.
Learning to read your body from the inside out, not necessarily, because if we just treat skills as, all right, here's the coach, he dictated 5 things I need to do, I just go do those 5 things. Now you've devoided the art form of the learning process.
Yeah.
And I think it's that art form of the learning process that can stick with athletes as well in other sports. And to be honest, once you do that, I just think it becomes more fun and embodied of a practice for the athlete versus, all right, coach wanted me to do track, here I'm doing track, here I'm learning sprint drills and all that stuff. Not to say there's not value there, but I'm just saying I think the lens by which we facilitate learning in track can also be really important, and getting people to understand that.
Awesome. Well, hey, Joel, it sounds like you're under time crunch out there. So again, I'm so grateful that you took the time to talk. I would happily chew on your ear for another couple hours, but I know there's kids running around and all that craziness. So I really appreciate your time, spending your thoughts and your expertise with us. And feel free. I'd love to have you on again in the future. Talk, training for sprinters, for jumpers, for vaulters. You mentioned you're coaching vaulter, and I use that term loosely. Also, I'm a pole vault coach that is still very at the beginning of that career, and I love it. I love the comparisons, the things that go in together, and I would love to get you on another time and talk about the 3D thing that you're talking about, because I use this a lot when I'm teaching my high jumpers. I say, you don't realize, but you're running in 3 dimensions. And I said,
Yes.
it's easy for basketball and volleyball because they run in a straight line, they lean back, they jump up. I said, you guys are running on a curve, and that introduces other things into there, and
Oh yeah.
depending on how much they get out of that, it's a new thing that has occurred to me just recently. But again, here on Raise the Bar, I want to thank Joel Smith for spending time with us from Just Fly Sports. If you got a second, you want to do any pimping for yourself, anything you want to throw out there to the listeners about how to get to you, that would help them to get access to your trainings and your teachings and coachings and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people know me on Instagram with Just Fly Sports. And then the Just Fly Performance Podcast is my educational resource that a lot of people get started with. Some track, I would say every like 5th show is probably track related.
Uh-huh.
It all works together. And then if you want to go to justflysports.com and hit free ebooks, you can get on my email newsletter. So I'm usually I write 1 email a week related to a lot of topics we talked about here today. So those are the
Awesome.
easiest places to get started.
All right. Well, I'm a fan. I'll be doing that. All right. Appreciate you again, Joel. Thanks for taking the time, and let's stay in touch. It'd be awesome to do this again sometime in the near future.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, thank you, Troy. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thanks, Joel. We'll talk soon. And that's going to wrap it up for us here on another episode of Raise the Bar. I am your host, Troy Haynes of Sky High and Fly Jump Camps fame. I am very grateful to our guest today, Joel Smith from Just Fly Sports. And he just a great wealth of information from him, a lot of experience, both coaching, training. He's got podcasts, doing, like I said, do a lot of things similar to what I've been doing. He's been doing them longer and way more experience. So he took the time to spend with us today from the East Coast. So thanks again. And if you want to do anything to find out what he's doing, go to Just Fly Sports on Instagram, and also justflysports.com. And he mentioned his ebooks and some of those things you can get in touch with there. And then this Friday, so in 2 days, I will be doing another podcast with Eric Moreno. He is a coach and trainer in the Huntington Beach area. I know he's worked with hurdlers before. He's also trained a young man named Cherokee Parks, who went to Marina High School here in the Southland, and then went to Duke and played, had more than a cup of coffee in the NBA. One of Eric's claim to fame. So we'll be talking with Eric Moreno on Friday. So until then, remember to continue to raise that bar, both personally and professionally. And we'll be talking to you here in a couple of days. Until then, so long.